A couple days ago, the story emerged. A vehicle was driving down a highway. A bunch of far-left activists were dancing on the highway. I mean that literally. They were doing something called like the candy cane shuffle or something. I don't know. The car came around a curve, tried to dodge two vehicles that were in the road, went on the shoulder. People started to run, swerved to the left, hit two people. I made a joke about it, that we need to do better. And it's a half joke. We need to do better to teach people not to wear all black at night on an interstate highway, dancing around a curve and behind an obstruction where drivers can't see. And a lot of people got really mad at me. So a bunch of these leftists were like, I can't believe Tim would blame the victim for being murdered. The guy who drove the car is not being charged with murder. And as far as we can tell, it was an accident. We have another story now. Driver 36 is arrested after running over BLM, two protesters standing in the roadway in Long Island. Anthony Cambereri was driving a Toyota RAV4, which hit protesters on Monday. Cops said Cambereri fled the scene before being arrested a short time later. Video shows one of the people hit by Cambereri's car being tended to by police. Now, this doesn't seem to be, there's no footage as far as I can tell from this article of the actual car hitting the protesters. I believe they're both okay. They went to the hospital. There's a photo. I think someone may have broken their arm. But at a certain point, we're coming a couple days off of somebody getting hit by a car on a highway. People are still thinking it's a safe idea to be standing in the road. And you look, it's and not in large numbers. You need something to make sure drivers know. You need to set up barricades or whatever. These people should not have been hit. I don't know the circumstances. We'll read the story. But look, man, things are just getting worse and worse as the shootings increase. And I want to talk about this story and just go through the details. But I want to get into the bigger picture here. New York City is collapsing because of things like this. Because of the ongoing riots and protests, the damage, the destruction, the loss of life. 500,000 middle-class individuals have fled New York City. As these people flee, the tax base erodes, services diminish, and the city starts to fall apart. But let's start by seeing the breaking story about people getting hit by a car. They say cops, Anthony Cambereri, 36, was driving a RAV4. They said protesters were standing in a roadway, according to police. Cops added that Cambereri fled the scene. A video of the aftermath shows one of the people hit by Cambereri's car being tended to by police. Cops were then seen surrounding the car as Cambereri sat in the driver's seat. So you can see a photo of, the cops showing up. Now, the reason I highlight this and what I mean when I say things like this result in the collapse of, say, New York City, seems like a big leap. Right now, hold on. These people were standing in the middle of a road. I get it. Protests do this sometimes. We just had someone die because of this. Maybe it's not a smart idea to keep doing this, but they keep doing this. They've done it. They do it all the time. They try and block highways. Eventually, a car is going to hit somebody, and it sucks, right? When the police showed up, because they called the police for help, they began yelling at the police. The police captured the guy who hit these protesters. The police also arrived when the woman on the highway got hit as well, the two women actually. Yet they would then scream in the face of these cops. Cops, I'd imagine, don't want to deal with that. It's already a bad enough job. They don't get paid all that much. And we're hearing lots of stories about cops retiring, cops quitting, cops calling in sick. Now crime is skyrocketing in New York. This is what I'm talking about. There is nothing the police can do to actually solve these problems. The cops are being demonized. The protesters are blaming the police and yelling at them, even when the cops come to help them. So what do? Do you even bother with the job anymore? I don't know. I can tell you, because of this behavior and attitude, cities like New York end up paying the price. Bigger cities pay the price. Or I should say it's more exaggerated in bigger cities. Let's read a little bit more. Pedestrians were left with non-life-threatening injuries and were taken to Huntingdon Hospital. According to witnesses speaking to Newsday, between 25 and 30 demonstrators were marching when they were hit by the gray Toyota. In my head, I thought he's going to stop. But he didn't stop at all, said Chris McCain from Freeport. For this to happen on Long Island is crazy. Another protester said he jumped out of the way when the Toyota hit a fellow demonstrator, sending him to the ground. The victim has trouble walking afterwards and was taken to a hospital. The second injured man was hit in the knee and also taken away in an ambulance. Now, I want to just remind all of you, most of the videos we've seen of cars hitting protesters have been cars slowing down and then like inching forward, and the protesters are screaming and jumping on the hood and stuff like that. It doesn't seem like this is the case. It seems like he did hit them at a relatively low rate of speed. There's a campaign in New York. I forgot what it was called, but they basically say something like, if you're going 25 miles an hour, you're much less likely to kill someone. If you're going 35, you're going to seriously injure them. So based on the injuries they have, it would seem like the guy wasn't going slow, like crawling, but wasn't going ridiculously fast. That's why they got knocked down, not sent flying in the air. It's important context. Well, of course, they started attacking the cops. He was only charged, Camberay was charged with third-degree assault and was issued a desk appearance. That says everything, doesn't it? The guy probably was not going fast at all. In fact, it sounds like he may have been going relatively slow for them to just let him leave with a desk appearance. A video filmed shortly after showed protesters sitting on the sidewalk. Surrounding him are cops and demonstrators shouting at the cops. The demonstrators appeared to be upset at other footage which showed cops talking to Camberay after his car allegedly hit protesters. One of them said, "You saw him, you observed him, having a casual conversation before you ripped him out of his car." The man then said through the megaphone, "This is what we're talking about. The disparity between how police treat white people and black people." This guy, I don't know what you want to happen, right? Do they want the cops to just be violent, to be brutal? If you're protesting police brutality and the cops shows up to your protest, of course he's not going to brutalize somebody, right? They say he slammed on the gas to hit us. A third video shows the injured man leaving hospital. He is seen being embraced by fellow demonstrators. Okay. It's a silly, I don't know. I don't want to call it silly. I was going to say it's a silly story, but I think it's worrying when these things kind of, escalate. But if the police are issuing this guy a desk appearance, like I said, I really don't think it's an issue of someone slamming the gas on to hit somebody. They're probably exaggerating. But take a look at what's happening in New York City. 63 people were shot over the 4th of July weekend. There you go. That's the news. That's what happens when cops are told everything they do is wrong. Now, we can have police reform. We can call out the bad cops 100%. But I have to wonder why it is they're calling for abolishing the police outright. That makes no sense. It's very dangerous and will lead to widespread suffering. And now it's coming. Take a look at this story from the Daily Mail. Nightmare in New York. How COVID-19, BLM protests and a liberal mayor are turning the city into a no-go zone as murders skyrocket, shops are looted, and 500,000 middle-class residents flee. What will be left of this city, man? I do not know. 2 bullet-ridden bodies lay sprawled on blood-stained concrete steps. Alongside, relatives of the victims are wailing and collapse to the ground. In another part of the city, a gang of youths used spray paint to disable security cameras before robbing a corner store. Later, video footage captures police officers sitting helplessly in their patrol car as a baying crowd hurls glass bottles at them. This is lawless New York, a city that was once America's glittering crown jewel, but which risks descending into mob rule. It already did. What do you mean? It already did. Murder figures have skyrocketed, and a combination of the coronavirus pandemic, Black Lives Matter protests, and weak political leadership is in danger of achieving wow. I'm not reading that, Daily Mail. Wow. I'm not reading that. The scenes described above took place last weekend. Chioke Thompson, 23, and his friend Stephanie Perkins had been gunned down on the steps of Chioke's Brooklyn home. With the gunmen still on the loose and their families insisting neither victim had any links to drugs or gang, the pair appeared to be the latest grim statistics in a crime wave sweeping the city. According to figures released by the New York Police Department, for the first 6 months of the year, there were 176 murders, an increase of 23% on the 143 killed during the same period last year. The number of shooter victims has gone up 51% to 616 this year. In June alone, there were 250 shootings compared to 97 in the same month last year. Month-on-month burglaries are up 119%, and car thefts are up 48%. Many blame New York's liberal mayor. No, I'm sorry, he's not a liberal, he's a progressive. Bill de Blasio, who has slashed police funding by $1 billion, ended the NYPD's controversial stop and frisk policy, which allowed police to stop and search anyone solely on the basis of reasonable suspicion, and who last week vowed to paint a huge Black Lives Matter sign outside President Trump's flagship Trump Tower. That's what you get. What's the mayor going to do for you? He's going to paint you a mural in the street. In fact, all 5 boroughs are supposed to have a big mural of Black Lives Matter. That's what you can get. Crime will skyrocket and people will flee. De Blasio has also introduced criminal justice reforms, including changes to bail and for dozens of offenses, which has meant violent criminals released onto the streets. I believe that's incorrect. I'm not entirely sure. My understanding is that it's only non-violent offenses, but it does result in criminals being released over and over and over again. This is a big challenge in terms of civil liberties. If someone isn't convicted of a crime, does the state have a right to hold them unless they can pay? And I believe the answer is no, but I do recognize that results in, well, crime. But it is better, look, I'd rather have freedom than I would rather have more freedom and less security, right? There's a balance there. You don't want too much security locking people up who can't afford to get out. Innocent people will suffer from that. But then again, it does lead to more crime. They're going to say, referring to the police, Trump tweeted, NYC is cutting police budget by $1 billion. And yet the NYC mayor is going to paint a big, expensive yellow Black Lives Matter sign on Fifth Avenue, denigrating this luxury avenue. He said this will further antagonize New York's finest, who love New York and vividly remember the horrible BLM chant, pigs in a blanket, fry 'em like bacon. Maybe our great police, who have been neutralized and scorned by a mayor who hates and disrespects them, won't let this symbol of hate be affixed to New York's greatest street. Spend this money fighting crime instead. Parts of Manhattan, famously the city that never sleeps, have begun to resemble a ghost town since 500,000 mostly wealthy and middle-class residents fled when COVID-19 struck in March. New York State has suffered the highest death toll in America, with more than 24,000 dead, nearly 10,000 more than the second hardest hit state, New Jersey, and 8 times the number killed by terrorists on 9/11. Streets once teeming with tourists are virtually empty. Shops and restaurants are boarded up to protect against looters. Hotels are closed. According to one resident, New York has become a place where the soup kitchens are full and skyscrapers are empty. I'm warning you all, if you are in New York, you need to start making plans. Not everybody can afford to leave, but the tax base is eroding. The police will have their budget slashed, not because of some political movement, but because there will be no budget. There will be no revenue to actually fund the police. You need people living in a city to support the infrastructure of the city. And this is one of the bigger problems we're going to be facing. Listen, whether or not it was COVID, whether or not it was the riots, remote work and automation are coming. And that means people don't need to live in these big cities anymore. What will end up happening is that the infrastructure we have built, which must be maintained, will become increasingly more expensive to those who live in the city. Eventually, the city collapses. And that's where things get weird. It's really funny how we went from a wired technological era to a wireless, and then back to wired, and now back to wireless. It's almost like the different, technologies kind of compete, outpacing each other in various ways. We had wireless communications, and then we were like, hey, guess what? This hardline fiber optic internet is actually better. And so there's actually a conversation briefly about, in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, perhaps we abandoned wireless communications. And more advanced cultures use more direct connected technologies. But now we're going back to wireless internet and things like that. The reason I bring that up, perhaps we go from mostly rural to mostly urban and back to rural. Perhaps now that we've advanced communications technologies and remote work to a point where people don't need to be in cities anymore, we're going to leave those cities. But that presents a bigger problem. With everything we're facing and the mismanagement, it's accelerating people leaving cities. The technology exists, right? So people don't need to be in that city. But there's no real incentive to just outright leave, right? Well, because of COVID, people left. Now because of the riots, people left. And now because of the slashing of police budget and the escalation of crime, which is the result of this, more people are leaving. You will have an infrastructure that has a static cost, but the people who pitch into that aren't there anymore. Let me put it this way. Let me give you an analogy. Let's say you live with 10 roommates and each of you wants one slice of pizza. And there is a pizza shop which delivers a large with 10 slices. I know, whatever, 8, fine, but 10 slices. So now everybody pitches in $1. The pizza arrives and everybody gets a slice of pizza. What happens when 9 of your roommates leave and it's just you? You still only want that one slice of pizza, but you still have to pay for the whole thing. And now you have to pay for it yourself. So now you're pitching in that whole $10, getting the whole pizza you don't want. You eat one slice and the rest just rots. And that's what will happen to New York City. As people begin to flee because of these problems, that stupid story about the driver was in Long Island. That's New York State. This is also on Cuomo. As people begin to leave the city, though, the buildings remain. And the buildings still have to be paid for to within reason. The plumbing system still has to be paid for. The electrical grid still has to be paid for. And if you are the only one left, you have to pay for all of it. The more people leave, the more those costs will transfer to you, the people who still live there. Crime will be skyrocketing as people can't afford the cost of living in this big city anymore. And eventually the city will be a ghost town. No one will actually be a resident or work there. It'll just be a bunch of empty buildings. Now, I don't know if we'll ever actually get to that point, but maybe. Detroit certainly has fallen substantially from where it used to be. And now there are just empty buildings everywhere. The issue with New York City, though, which is much scarier, is that much of Manhattan, for instance, is like urban skyscrapers. You know, when Detroit started to diminish and the cost of services and, say water, for instance, started to skyrocket, we ended up with the Flint crisis. So I could be getting this wrong. It's been a long time. So I actually did an interview with some of the activists and nonprofit organizations that were working on the Flint water crisis. And basically what I was told, so again, you fact check me on this one, was that as people fled Michigan, the cost of water increased per person, like I explained. It became some of the most expensive water services in the country, particularly in Flint. Because Flint couldn't afford the Detroit water system anymore, which is clean, they switched to the Flint water, which was toxic and polluted and disgusting. And people started to get poisoning. Children started to get lead poisoning and Legionnaire's disease because they couldn't afford the clean water from the big city. This is what happens. Now I'm told the area has some of the most expensive water in the country. This will happen to New York as well. Now, I don't know where New York plans to get their water from because I think their water source is, they have one water source, whereas Flint and outlying areas could, had different sources, even though they were bad. But the areas outside of Detroit, the residential homes, started to fall apart. And there was a period where urban legend tells, this is what I was told by some people from the area, that the police would go around burning down abandoned neighborhoods. The whole neighborhoods would be abandoned. The buildings were just decaying, so they would just light them up and then run away. I'm not saying that's true. I have friends, when I was hanging out in Chicago, I grew up in Chicago and I'd be skating there, and I had some friends who were from Detroit who moved out of the area and would tell me that's what people thought was happening. Maybe you can look that up. Maybe it's just, rumors and urban legends. But there were so many areas where there were just whole neighborhoods completely abandoned or like at least sparsely populated. We've seen similar things in Indiana. You can go, man, I tell you what, I don't want to rag on Indiana, but you can go to some of these places when you can see where industry has fallen apart. Actually, on the front page of my main channel, I have a video called American Wasteland where we went to Gary, Indiana, and you can see what happens when people leave, when jobs dry up. Massive buildings just abandoned, schools totally abandoned. And man, it was crazy looking at these records from like the 70s, back when this school used to be hustling and bustling and people were in and out. Outside of that school, just rows of just destroyed homes, abandoned. And over time, they erode, they fall apart, no one repairs them. And then you just have huge swaths of just empty houses falling apart, collapsing. Will that happen to New York? I think the answer is yes. Now, maybe not. I'm not going to pretend like it's a 100, it's a guarantee, a one, the ratio is 1-to-1. Maybe there's a 51% chance it happens. Maybe it's a guarantee, but it only affects 10%, 20% of the buildings. But I lived in New York for a while, man. And I lived in the Crown Heights area. And a lot of these buildings are just totally abandoned. And it's crazy to see, like a 3-story building. They're all connected. And your building is connected to another building that's totally abandoned, just gutted and abandoned, boarded up, and inside is nothing. It's like, what do you do with all these buildings when people flee? So they talk about all these issues, gentrification, white flight, whatever. I'll tell you what, man, so long as this absurdity continues, so long as people keep attacking the police, we're going to see more of it, man. Commercial mortgage delinquencies surged at record monthly rate in June. And here's the big warning, man. Something big is coming. Delinquencies in commercial mortgage-backed securities jumped by 213 basis points in June to 3.59% from 1.46. It was the largest one-month spike since Fitch Ratings began tracking the metric nearly 16 years ago. 16 years ago, huh? The hotel and retail sectors are seeing the worst delinquencies as the coronavirus has been especially hard on those industries. I'm not going to pretend to know exactly how this will play out. Let me tell you, man. Remember the big market crash, late '07, early '08, I think it was, because of mortgage-backed securities, delinquencies? If this is bigger than that, what comes next? So, hey, Bill Maher, you got your wish. Here comes the recession, I suppose, right? Things are rebounding back. It's hard to know exactly how things will play out. But I'll tell you this. I mentioned this before when it came to shutting down the economy for COVID. You have a big freight train. You stop the first car. Just snap your fingers and it stops. What happens to every car in the back? They don't just stop. They pile up. They flip off the tracks. They start rolling. They're completely destroyed. The train can't just stop. And the ripples will continue to spread. People have no idea. They thought that with COVID and the lockdown, it was going to be like, I can't get a cheeseburger for a couple of months. I warned. Remember this. I said, what happens when these people who have jobs at a burger shop all of a sudden don't have money to pay their rent? Now the landlords can't afford to pay the management companies, the groundskeepers, etc. And now these buildings, the mortgages don't get paid. The people who don't pay rent, that turns into a delinquency. The delinquency affects mortgage-backed securities. The whole system cannot just stop. It crashes. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe they want it to happen because they want to blame Trump for it. I have no idea. But I'll tell you what, man, the cities aren't looking good. I hope you've been paying attention to what's going on. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. at timcast.net, and I will see you all then.